Hello, on the air, the program Time. Among the news items of the day, again in top position is the pre-election topic, because it became known that the President Boris Yeltsin has vetoed the law governing the elections of the State Duma. He sent off an official letter today to Ivan Rybkin, wherein he informed of his decision. In this connection, aides are accentuating the fact that the President does hold consultations with experts, but later makes his decisions independently. At the press conference, with the participation of Georgy Satarov and Mikhail Krasnov, which was held today by the press service of the President, it was emphasized as much as possible that the veto of the head of state on the law of elections is not a revolutionary makeover, but merely a correction of a few paragraphs. Advisors of the President, one of whom is an attorney, the other is a political scientist, presume that the Duma proposed equal representation from the party and one-mandate districts will restrict participation of the regions. Therefore, it's lawful to bring the number of independent candidates to 300 and correspondingly reduce to 150 representatives of the parties. Simultaneously, for objectivity, the person receiving more than 50% of the vote is considered to have won. This is not a fact, but the opinion of journalists, however, that voter turnout will not be as lively as expected. Viewed as unjustifiable is the desire of the Duma members to force each candidate to retire if employed as a journalist or a civil servant. Furthermore, developments of events at the press conference, it was said, could go in two directions. Either the calm application of correction and adoption by the simple majority, or having gained more than 300 votes, the Duma will overcome the presidential veto, and then the conciliatory commission will have to become involved. And only in the event that if that commission doesn't find a solution, debate will be carried to the Constitutional Court. The entire procedure is given 2 months, so there's still time. At the same time, as was repeated several times, elections will take place in the time indicated by the Constitution, no matter what. As was to be expected, discussion of this principal decision by the President has begun. According to Tartas, the Communist Party, the Duma factions, the Yabloko and Democratic Party will support overcoming the presidential veto on the law governing elections of the Duma deputies. However, compromises are being studied. Relying on compromise is the Speaker of the lower chamber. The President has used his right of veto. And what does the Duma now intend to do? The Duma intends, in strict compliance with the regulations, to undertake actions to create a conciliatory commission, a three-sided commission to feature representatives of the chambers and representatives of presidential structures. Those positions on which Boris Nikolaevich expressed his doubt, we have discussed them for already several weeks, and they may be resolved. The first position, the 225 mandates, which are by party list to be supported by voters, and 225 mandates which are presumed to be elected from the districts. It's proposed that the ratio be changed from 150 from party lists and 300 from electoral districts. The Federative Council, in a ratings vote, insisted on this, and I presume that the State Duma may quite likely support the proposal of the Federative Council. I see no principal difference, 225 to 225 or 150 to 300. Those who are a real party or a movement with the support of voters, for them, such rules of the game are completely acceptable. The second position regards the fact that the 44th article restricts the constitutional rights of civil servants. Those who occupy political posts should, of course, be unconditionally participants of the electoral process. How else could it be? It's the same in all countries. Therefore, the 44th article requires a different wording, and all civil servants may be permitted to run. Information agencies report that the leadership of the Federative Council of Russia welcomes the President's decision to decline the law on elections. In the Ministry of Justice today, registration certificates were issued to the social political movement Our Home is Russia. Hence, this movement has officially been registered for the pre-election campaign. During the course of 10 days, the Ministry of Justice verified the instituting documents of the movement Our Home is Russia. Legal expertise was conducted and verification unification of documents and hence the actual state of affairs within the political movement our home is Russia. Partially that is done because the movement of such a scale is registered by the Ministry of Justice for the first time. All required documents comply with the current legislation. The chairman of the movement our home is Russia, the Prime Minister of Russia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, receiving the registration certificate, said that if until this day we were only involved in organizational work, organizational committees, the Constituent Assembly, as of today, the real work begins. We don't intend to pursue our own private interests. We didn't create the organization to further our own agenda, nor the government's, nor Chernomyrdin's, but we created an organization and movement needed by our country to conduct the major task of unification within the country. We need good backup services, legal and legislative backup, and therefore we need such a State Duma which could work expeditiously. We need peace in the country. Political processes move quickly. There is also political coloring to everything occurring around Channel 1 television. Today at the session of the Federative Council, again put to the vote was the law deferred once regarding the special manner of privatizing state and television and radio. Voting was conducted 2 times. Today's session of the Federative Council was sensational and dramatic, which again examined the law on the special manner of privatization of organizations of state television and radio. Essentially, the document affects public Russian television, and all debates unfolded around public Russian television. As a result, 2 hours were needed by the Federative Council, which in the morning voted down the law to change their decision after the recess. To the contrary, deputies decided to repeat the voting and on the demand of one of their colleagues who didn't participate in the first round. The document provides that privatization of organizations of state and television and radio and their property is conducted on conditions defined by a special law. Until it is adopted, privatization is suspended, which also means suspension of the presidential decree on the basis of which PRT was created. If you open the text of that law, it's entitled the special manner of privatization, but in actual fact, each of the points within it speaks of suspending, banning, liquidating, and recognizing as invalid. You know, I've never seen such laws in my experience which only ban and abolish but establish nothing. There is no new manner provided for in this law of privatization. I'm embittered as a lawyer that, not denying the most serious legal shortcomings of that law, the Federative Council nonetheless deemed it possible to adopt it. Now, according to the Constitution, the law will be sent to the President, on whom rests the final decision to sign the document or not. The law today was also declined on state support for mass media and book publishing in Russia. In the State Duma, it's suggested to create a conciliatory commission. Today, for the second time, the Federative Council has submitted an inquiry on the constitutionality of the acts of the President and government, which launched the combat in Chechnya. This time, it has been submitted without being marked confidential. As you probably remember, the Constitutional Court postponed examination of the matter because it was marked confidential. In Chechnya proper, at night, combat continued, but the accent of today's reports is on something else, on dialogues, which possibly will be held the 25th of May in Grozny. Arriving in Moscow today was the representative of the chairman of the OSCE with a personal message to participants of the talks. Jahar Dudayev, with his closest circle, also discussed the possibility of participating in the dialogue process, and as Interfax was told by Chechen sources, Dudayev and his circle insist that these talks be held without the participation of the leader of the Committee of National Rebirth, Umarov Turkhanov, and according to the same agency, representing Dudayev at the talks will be Usman Imayev, who during Dudayev's regime was Prosecutor General of Chechnya. As we learned at today's traditional meeting of President Yeltsin and the Premier Chernomyrdin, among other matters, they examined the question of the possibility of resolving the Chechen crisis politically. And as the source said, and confirms various versions of restoring constitutional order were discussed, from the dialogue process to forceful methods. In the State Duma of Russia today, the matter was discussed of the presence of the 14th Army in Pridnestrovye. As you know, the commander has arrived in Moscow for hearings. At the same time, a commission of the Ministry of Defense has left for Pridnestrovye to inspect the army. This is the second time of late. Observers noted this fact as being quite tendentious. At the same time, the Ministry of Defense has stated that the visit of the commission is not a premeditated action. Today's parliamentary hearings on the situation in Pridnestrovye and the fate of the 14th Army will most likely please the majority of participants. The deputies had an opportunity to voice the interests of Russia through the wording of the Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Sergei Krylov. Moldavian parliamentarians used their visit to Moscow to underscore the love of peace of official Chisinau and to assess as interference in domestic affairs the recent resolution of the State Duma, which cast a doubt on the feasibility of withdrawal of the 14th Army. Representatives of the unrecognized Pridnestrovian Republic also made an appearance explaining the pause in talks between Chisinau and Tiraspol because of the intractability of the Moldavian leadership. However, the hearings didn't close all matters. The Ministry of Defense is prepared to withdraw the Russian troops from Pridnestrovye, however, is waiting for ratification by the Duma of a corresponding agreement. The Duma will eventually have to examine that question. However, this will be no earlier than Chisinau and Tiraspol managed to agree. Considering the fact that in the near future no breakthrough is likely in Moldavian talks, the safekeeping of almost 500,000 tons of weapons will remain the main problem of the commander of the army, Lebed. We don't need to repeat another Chechnya so that later there would be questions. Dudayev promised to return half of those weapons, and then he reconsidered. I don't want to be an accomplice of this crime, and I won't permit anyone to loot these weapons. If I have to tear off someone's head, I will, without flinching a muscle in this hand. The commander of the army expressed willingness to answer questions. However, there were no questions. Today it was learned that the agenda of the coming summit of the heads of state in Minsk, it will include 8 matters. One is to extend the presence of the collective peacekeeping forces in Tajikistan and Abkhazia. Incidentally, President Nazarbayev will not be able to attend because of a cold. In Kazakhstan, the 4th round of talks on the regularization of the Tajik problem continued. Foremostly, to put an end to the escalation of combat, and only after that, through mutual compromises and concessions, to hold political dialogues and move toward national reconciliation. This opinion prevails at the Almaty meeting, although the dialogues have not yielded anything substantive yet. Meanwhile, today the head of the government delegation of Tajikistan, the first deputy prime minister, Mahmad Saeed Abay-Duloyev, organized a press conference where he asked journalists to devote more attention to the situation on the Tajik-Afghan border. It's violated daily, every 5 to 6 hours. And nonetheless, the situation is controlled basically through the forces of the Russian army. Meanwhile, in Tajikistan, the operation continues to neutralize terrorists. 6 more people have been arrested. The leaders of the Tajik opposition deny their involvement in terrorist acts, although one of the leaders has admitted to the existence of special squads among his supporters. But according to him, they only serve to exert exclusively political pressure on official Dushanbe in the inter-Tajik talks. Yesterday's gas line explosion in Georgia, which fed natural gas to Romania, could again blow up the dialogue process on Nagorno-Karabakh. Today it was learned that Armenia has suspended its participation in that process in the framework of the Minsk conference of the OSCE because it accuses Azerbaijan of acts of international terrorism. Again in Armenia, not a single cubic meter of natural gas is being fed, and again light is passed to homes no more than 1 hour per day. Repair of damaged stretches. The first explosion disabled 65, the second 75 meters of natural gas line. Will need at least 1 week of intense work, and that means that again all the strain of feeding at least the objects of survival dependency of the Republic falls on the turbines of the hydroelectrical station, consequently Lake Savan, whose water level compared to the end of May of last year has decreased by another 40 centimeters. In the last 2 years, this is already the 35th explosion of the gas line which feeds Armenia. In response to yet another hostile action, the government of the Republic has issued a statement. Armenia, it's noted, is hereafter suspending further involvement in dialogues on the peaceful resolution of the Karabakh conflict in the framework of the Minsk group of the OSCE until such time that the world community provides it with the appropriate guarantees that Azerbaijan will cease the practice of international terrorist acts and also serious violations of the non-resumption of fire agreement in effect in the Republic. On the eve of the Independence Day in Georgia, as of tomorrow, additional security measures will be applied, and as previously, the question of the return of refugees, as previously, is still a heated topic in the Republic. For almost 2 years, the question cannot be resolved of the return to Abkhazia of more than 300,000 refugees. Recently, the Abkhazian side stated that on the 25th of March, a survey will be conducted, and then refugees may begin to return to the Galsk region. However, only 250 people per week. Apart from that the fact that at those tempos, the process will take 48 years, because from the Galsk region, 100,000 Georgians were displaced. And it also contradicts the memorandum which was prepared with Russia's participation, where it clearly states that the process of return of refugees must be en masse and unconditional. What regards safety guarantees promised to the refugees by current Abkhaz leadership, it's difficult to believe them given the events in Abkhazia these days. I can cite the example of the Galsk region, where after the return of refugees, several more of them died from the peaceful population than during combat. Therefore, we feel that, first of all, in the Galsk region, the jurisdiction of Georgia should be restored and structures should be put back into place which were there before the war, and only then can the return of refugees begin. Such a procedure should continue right up to the Russian-Georgian border along the Psul River. On the Crimean problem today, the OSCE view was expressed in a letter sent today to Kiev to the Parliaments Ukraine and Crimea and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic. It says the resolution of the Crimean problem must be based on the principle of territorial wholeness of Ukraine and basic tenets of its constitution. The armed forces of Ukraine are interested in cooperating with Russia and its armed forces. This was stated today to journalists on the occasion of the beginning of Ukrainian-American training exercises, Shield Peace 95. Commander of the headquarters of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Anatoly Lopata. Answering questions about the possibility of Ukraine entering NATO, he said that the military department of Ukraine never examines insurmountable missions. Arriving in Ukraine from the military base on the territory of Germany today were almost 300 American troops. That's the 3rd Infantry Division of the U.S. On the Ukrainian side, the 7th Regiment of the Yaur Division, around 400 people are participating. It's the first training of its type on Ukrainian soil, the cost of which is around $5 million. It's expected the training will be visited by the American Defense Secretary William Perry. Today, the President of Russia has opened the first session of the Council on Science and Technical Policies under the President of Russia and said that members of the Council will be issued Kremlin passes in order to ease their communications with the leadership of the country. The many remarks of scientists about the woeful state of science evidently have had some sort of effect. From now on, members of the Coordination Committee will be allowed to enter the Kremlin unimpeded, receiving special passes, which should have an effect to jointly solve the most serious problems of Russian science, although regarding the Council itself, the President noted, "I did have my doubts, but finally, I was convinced of the main purpose." Boris Yeltsin didn't specify what doubts, but concentrated on what is of specific concern. That is the disjointedness of the sectoral high academic institutions in science and the absence of priorities in scientific research and difficulties with financing. The President implied he counts on greater participation of the scientists in resolving the problems. The positions appear to coincide. This was said to us in private conversation by the academic Evgeny Velikhov. He said scientists came not to ask for money, but offer support in a difficult time for the country. Financing remains one of the most painful areas. In the budget, funds for science will be increased, the President said. However, he urged that market opportunities be used to the fullest in attracting the funds of private investors and create the market-oriented scientific developments. General concern is caused by the aging scientific personnel. To a degree, the situation is ameliorated by my decree providing for postponement of conscription into the army for graduates of higher institutes who are to be employed at state and scientific institutions. But of course, this is not sufficient. Participants of the meeting discussed priorities and development of science in the plans of the Council for the year. The woeful state of Russian science, which was embarrassed to discuss because it was obstinately ignored by the government, has reached a crisis. 300 billion rubles, not considering inflation and price growths, was allotted monthly to support domestic science, which would have been the source of pride in Cambridge and Sorbonne. 200,000 is the average salary of a Russian professor. The drama was exacerbated in April when budget allocations were decreased by another 40 billion. And here, talking openly about strikes were entire sectors of science. Probably this was the reason for the recently adopted important government decision. Here's its sense. I think in May or in June, roughly by about 1.5 times, will increase what scientists received in April and in March. But for sure, in the second half of the year, we'll emerge onto a different level as promised. Promised by whom? That was said by the first Vice Premier, the Minister of Finance's Minister of Science. Money will be needed for science. Today, at the first session of the Federal Commission, which is responsible for the revenue portion of the budget, they discussed how much the budget will receive from privatization. The session was chaired by the first Vice Premier Anatoly Chubais. At one of the last meetings of the Cabinet of Ministers, it was noted that revenues from monetary privatization are catastrophically late. Given the plan per year of 8.8 trillion rubles, as of today, the budget has received only 140 billion. A new commission is to correct that situation. Enormous sums are lost by the government because the price of privatized companies is often reduced. That is because their starting price is still determined at values of the 1st of July 1992. In 1 week, the Federal Commission must develop a new method of appraisal, considering contemporary market realities. Members of the Commission are also thinking how to include the shares of Russian companies into play on the international stock market. For now, Western investors demonstrate caution. They say one mustn't go to Russia because there is corruption, crime, and Chechnya. And we have to dispel all of that. Sergei Belayev feels that monetary privatization will enable the sale of controlling packages of shares into reliable hands, unlike the Czech phase, where there were cases of racketeering. Yes, we did have that, because there were opportunities to buy checks at low prices. In 1 hour, the Commission discussed an entire complex of questions. Such efficiency, Belayev explained by the professionality of representatives of executive power and efforts to expedite tempos of privatization. Today, the chairman of the Budgetary Committee of the Duma, Mikhail Zadornov, at a press conference said that 103% of revenues gathered upon the first quarter, in essence, were derived through the sale of gold and precious metals and other measures of a temporary nature. Attention is directed to the need to re-examine the approach to realizing the budget. And now, how 3 million people will live easier. In the Constitutional Court, the case of Zoya Aleshnikova from Kaliningrad has been reviewed. From the beginning of the procedure, we had followed its course. Zoya Aleshnikova lost everything, her parents, her home, her property, and by law could not avail herself of full compensation. She, just as approximately 3 million children of repressed parents, was considered only to be affected. And the Constitutional Court supported the opinion that her rights were infringed. By resolution of the court, the Federal Assembly of Russia should make the correct amendments to the law on rehabilitation of victims of political repressions. The execution of these sections, safety of the citizen and the public, and to strengthen federative structure and national relations in the Agreement on Social Accord, were reviewed at today's session of the Conciliatory Commission on Realizing the Agreement, chaired by Sergei Filatov. Despite the absence in Parliament of a single position on the matters of safety of civil and social society, State Duma made contribution to compliance with that part of the agreement. This was stated at the session by the first Deputy Chairman of the Duma, Mikhail Mityukov. Several laws were adopted, and including on organs of federal security services. The public's fears of the recreation of a sole fiscal department through this body should be balanced by restrictions embedded in the law. Amendments were also made to the law on military service, which increases the term of service. Adoption of that law, in the opinion of Mityukov, to a degree is a result of the pressure by the leadership of the armed forces. At the same time, the adoption of the law on alternative services is delayed. The responsible secretary of the Interdepartmental Commission on Public Safety and Crime and Corruption spoke about practical steps to ensure human rights and liberties in Russia. Criminal charges have been filed against 7,000 leaders and active participants of criminal groups. Street crime has decreased in 65 regions of Russia. No matter what, the realization of the section, safety of the citizen and the public, will possibly force the most ardent critics of the Agreement on Social Accord to be silent, whose fate they consider to be sad. All the television channels in the United States today were showing the explosion in Oklahoma City. Today in the United States, Oklahoma City, several controlled explosions demolished what remained of the federal building at the terrorist act on the 19th of April. As a result of that explosion, then 168 people died. The remains of 2 more people are still in the rubble. The investigation on this matter evidently will continue for a very long time. For now, the court has released on bail one of the 2 charged with that crime. Israeli police dispersed Christian Arab demonstrators protesting the provocation in a Christian church in Tel Aviv. Spontaneous demonstrations occurred after an Israeli soldier locked himself into a church and opened fire from an automatic weapon and blew up several grenades, causing serious damage to the building. Later, he was arrested. The Minister of Police of Israel called him a lone madman and called on the Christian clergy to help restore order in the city. The decision of Israel to suspend the confiscation of 53 acres of land in the East Arab part of Jerusalem generated a positive reaction in the world, but does this mean the final solution for the problem of the Eternal City? The opinion of our commentator, Igor Rostovtsev. Obviously, the Israeli government did not do this because of external pressure. The many facts of the past and present indicate that it is not used to conceding. Evidently, this is how the government deflects the impending crisis in the Palestinian-Israeli peace process. Undoubtedly, it was a difficult decision for Prime Minister Rabin and those unanimous in thought with him. The reaction of the right could have been guessed in advance, and it did follow, and in quite a severe form. Apart from that, the elections are not far off. How this decision will reflect on the ratings of the Premier, apart from reproaches of excessive spinelessness. On the other hand, it clearly contributed to placating Palestinians, among whom are such that in connection with the confiscation of land predicted a new outburst of enmity. This decision helped smooth over a wave of discontent in the Arab world. Postponed was the planned meeting of the Arab leaders in Casablanca. If there's no cause, there's no conversation. So, for now, the geographic and demographic image of Jerusalem will remain unchanged. But is that for long? One must still remember that 15 years ago, this eternal city was declared the single and indivisible capital of the Israeli state. My opinion is it would be naive to think that the Israelis are forever relinquishing individual control of Jerusalem. The suspension of the confiscation decision does not yet mean its abolition. On the other hand, one may foresee that the Arabs will eternally stand on their positions. No matter what, the fate of Jerusalem is a subject of the future and not the present talks. Otherwise, any attempts to change its current status could precipitate many other difficult problems. The German police arrested 2 escapees from the high-security prison and freed the hostage they seized. The search took 2 days. Both escapees are infected with the AIDS virus and were prepared to commit any crime. One of them, for the first time, escaped from prison exactly 11 years ago and was arrested then the day after the escape. Today in Istanbul, the famous journalist and owner of a major Turkish newspaper, Yeni Gunandil Mehmet Bekir Gubangil, was killed. The murderers fled. In Istanbul, the entire police forces mobilized. In the local news, it's noted that Turkish journalists are more frequently becoming victims of terrorists lately. Today, with the second attempt, authorities managed at the abandoned oil platform near the Scottish Islands to remove activists of the International Environmental Protection Organization Greenpeace. However, few people managed to close themselves off in office buildings, protesting the decision of the Shell company to sink the old oil platform. According to Greenpeace, on it are still many toxic substances which will poison the inhabitants of the seaworld in that region. In Indonesia, the second strong earthquake in the last 2 days occurred. Approximately 30 people were injured. Material damage is assessed at several millions of dollars. Today on the Japanese island Hokkaido, an earthquake occurred with a force of 5.6 on the Richter scale. There is no news for now about casualties or damages. Today there's an anniversary. A newspaper turns 70, whom everyone lovingly calls Komsomolka, the SNG, the country of our newspaper. There is such a rubric in the Komsomolskaya Pravda, and it is their country. They conquered readers under socialism and remained popular even now. For 70 years we've been reading Komsomolka, and it's still just as interesting. The newspaper astounded us by its universality and desire to find out something unusual. They fought for a bright future, fought in World War II, defended socialism, and stood up for reforms. First to publish Solzhenitsyn, climbed to mountaintops, and parachuted out on the North Pole. The Komsomolskaya Pravda was awarded with 5 orders, among them the Lenin Order with the sequence number 1. It lived through a one-party system, created its own couch party, but no matter how quality and quantity of parties may change, Komsomolka is everyone's favorite. Komsomolka always lives with difficulty because it seems to take on much, and the burden is always manageable. It never sought an easy fate, this newspaper, and may God grant that it never do that. Today, Komsomolka arranged a friendly meeting of its employees of all generations and friends in the Moscow House of Journalists. At 10 p.m. in honor of the newspaper, a festive salute will ring out, and we would like to read Komsomolka for at least another 70 years. The publication Arguments and Facts conducted a survey who attends theater these days and concluded that the previous loyal, stable, educated theatrical audience no longer exists. But it turns out that with that same complaint, that was the same complaint in the golden 19th century. Have we no public, Ostrovsky exclaimed. Gogol was shocked by lovers of prosaic pompous spectacle. They've always complained, but they still love theater. And there were many fans today in Petersburg at Natalia Dudinska's reception, where she received the diploma of the honorary doctor of the Humanitarian University. Onto the stage of the Humanitarian University emerged this elderly lady leaning on a cane. The auditorium exploded into applause, and ovations continued. Maybe Natalia Mikhailovna Dudinska remembered those years when she shone on theatrical stages of the world, but her soul was always given over to the Kirov and currently the Mariinsk Theater. The art of the Russian prima ballerina enlightened the youth of our grandfathers, fathers, and mothers. They went to the Kirov Theater to see Dudinska. They went to see her in Swan Lake, Giselle, and Cinderella. She astounded her viewers with her beautiful, inspired manner of dancing. Therefore, the crystal slipper, by right, belongs to Natalia Mikhailovna, said Dmitry Sergeyevich Likhachov, presenting her with the exquisite shoe. Incidentally, the famous scientist was the first honorary doctor of the Humanitarian University. The famous ballerina debuted on the stage as a school child in Sleeping Beauty, but in the school of true classics she studied under Agrippina Yakovlevna Baganova and later became her worthy successor. The rector of the university, Alexander Lipisortsky, presented the diploma of an honorary doctor and mantle to the national artist of Russia, Natalia Mikhailovna Dudinska, which is the symbol of the spirituality of our times. In Moscow, in the Polytechnical Museum, a remarkable evening. It's underway even now. That's the rebirth of tradition. Our film crew was quite rushed to get back to the studio and managed to air and literally ran the video over to the technician. Poetry is the only thing which in Russia is of the highest class. It was and it still is. Today, the poets return to the Polytechnical, the same one where Voznesensky said goodbye to in the 1960s with the words Polytechnical, my Russia, about which Mayakovsky said in the 1920s, how crowded, 100 grams of auditorium per person. Where the king of fools, Durov, announced the name of king of poets, and Pasternak met Bloch. Talent is the only news which is always new. A quote from Pasternak hung in the auditorium, and a bouquet of forget-me-nots from a Kujava who couldn't attend today was given out by one flower to those on stage, and the evening began. The return to the Polytechnical, its name, and the rebirth of tradition of literary evenings of the museum, which began in the 20s and was reborn in the 60s. Those who came here didn't need the medical word resuscitate. They apparently were waiting for this. Chubaites and Burbalis nobly avoided interview. Today they said poets speak here. And Voznesensky, who once said, we part politechnicheski today, greeted it again. Let there be as many as possible good traditions that are reborn, and I bid you farewell. Vladimir Topilsky has already turned on the microphone. You'll find out about the sports news. All the best. On Channel 1, the news sports. Good evening. In Dusseldorf, the Team World Tennis Championships continue. This is the last major tournament prefacing the Open French Championships. After the singles matches, a tie 1-1 between the Spanish and Croat teams, scoring Ivan Ishurch in three-set single brought down the Spaniard Alberto Versategui, and Carlos Costa without a problem defeated the little-known Croat Sasha Herson. The leader of the Swiss team, Stefan Edberg, playing on the nerves of his fans, brilliantly held a decisive match against the Australian Pratt Rafter. A victory for the Scandinavians was provided by Magnus Larsson, who beat Jason Stoltenberg. Incidentally, Edberg, for the first time since 1984, is not among the seeded players at the Roland Garros. In this list is our Evgeny Kafelnikov in ninth place. Among the women, the top three tennis players are equal in their contending for the crown, Sanchez, Graf and Pierce. Tomorrow at the Vienna Ernst Happel Stadium, the major match of the season of the Club European Soccer Championships. They will be disputed by Milan and Ajax. The semi-defense Dutchman Frank Kajaert had the trophy 5 years ago. But emotions plague the player before meeting with their former teammates. Soccer is gaining popularity in North America. The Canadian team, which only twice beat rivals from Europe, has beat the Northern Ireland team at the start of the international tournament 2-0. Both goals were scored by Paul Pesky-Salida, who went through the English school. News of the transfer market. The defender of the Roman team, Tottenham, Georgi Popescu, signed a 4-year contract with Barcelona. Johan Cruyff was seeking replacement for the Dutchman Ronald Koeman, who is going home. We will still return to soccer in this broadcast. Now it's time for our traditional video overview. In Lausanne at the World Badminton Championships, the individual competitions have begun. Not being affected by the great giants was the Russian Andrei Antropov, who's entered the second round. Marina Yakusheva, however, has lost her match today. News from the ice rinks of the NHL. The semi-final matches were played in the Eastern Conference. The second straight victory was held by Philadelphia over the current Stanley Cup holder, New York Rangers, this time 4-3. The losers have 3 goals by the offense attacker Brian Leach. In the other pair, Pittsburgh, New Jersey, the score is evened 1-1. Yesterday, the Devils cut down the Penguins 4-2. The fate of this match was decided in the third period. Playing a marvelous game was Mario Lemieux-Clut. He scored 2 goals into the Pittsburgh net. The first match in the finals of the Western Conference of the NBA was held 6 seconds before the end of the fourth quarter. Houston ripped the victory from San Antonio 94-93. In his full glory was Hakeem Olajuwon. Leader of the Rockets has 27 points. The ex-world champion Formula One driver Nigel Mansell will not drive in the Monaco Grand Prix. His place in the Team McLaren Mercedes will be taken by Mark Blundell from England. One of the 3 whales of professional bicycle sporting, Giro d'Italia, has taken the mountains and now is taking a day off. After 10 laps, the leadership of the Swiss Tony Rominger is without a doubt. Tomorrow, the 11th level is along the route Petra Sancho and Chioka. And again, soccer. Tomorrow, the 1/8 round match for the championships of the country. Simultaneously, 3 most interesting matches to be held in Moscow. The central match between the Moscow Army and Dynamo team. In the 2 last rounds, the Army gained only 1 point and is full of a desire to rehabilitate itself before its fans. Now, against supporting the leader is the team of Konstantin Beskov. I'll remind you that last Saturday, the Blues and Whites lost 2 points in Nizhny Novgorod. The auto plant team of the capital, after devastating defeat from Vladikavkaz Spartak 1-4, will meet with Sochi Pearl. This match evidently will show how justified Torpedo is for its claim to the medals. And finally, the match in Luzhniki promises to be spectacular between the 3-time Russian champion Moscow Spartak and Rotor. Details in tomorrow's broadcast. This was the Sports News on Channel 1. Preparing our usual video accent, we remembered the Pierre de Coubertin's quote, "Sport, you are peace." In India, evidently, some apparently don't know this.
Добрый вечер.
Good evening. Tomorrow, the weather in the Kirov and Perm districts and the Republic of Komi will be controlled by a lethargic anticyclone. Here, as previously, it's dry and warm. At night, the temperatures will not go below +7 to 12. During the day, under the bright sun, the air will be as warm as +22 to 25. Even in the northeast of Komi, 12 to 17 above zero. The weather in the northwest of Russia will be defined by a cyclone, which is moving from the Botnik Gulf. In the zone of atmospheric fronts, torrential rains will pass with thunderstorms on the Kola Peninsula from +15 to 20 degrees. In the Arkhangels district and Vologda area, 18 to 23. An atmospheric front which is passing along the central latitudes of Russia divides two air masses. To the east of Moscow, in warm air during the day hours, the temperatures will show 23 to 28, with some strong thunderstorms in the western areas of Russia. In the cold air, no precipitation, temperatures in Smolensk, Leningrad and Karelia 15 to 20 degrees. In the Baltic states and the Kaliningrad district from 12 to 19 degrees. In Belarus, variably cloudy skies, 15 to 20 degrees. Central Chernozem area in Ukraine and in Moldova, in the zone of an atmospheric front, thunderstorms will pass through during the day hours, 19 to 24 degrees. On the central and lower Volga, it's mostly clear and dry. That's the influence of an anticyclone over the Urals. At night, 15 to 20, during the day, 27 to 32. Same temperature in the Krasnodar and Stavropol Rim areas, but here, under the influence of a cyclone over the Black Sea, and at atmospheric fronts, rains and thunderstorms will pass through, winds will increase. Beyond the Caucasus, sunny and hot, +28 to 33 degrees. In St. Petersburg, mostly clear, no rain. At night, +6 to 8, during the day, 17 to 19 degrees. In the capital, it will continue to be warm with some light thunderstorms. At night, 11 to 13. During the day, 22 to 24 degrees throughout the district, from 21 to 26 degrees. Such weather awaits us tomorrow. Goodbye.